So today we're going to do part 2 of the Codex of Earthworks. We're going to see more of the magical races and how they are governed. Nerd Nation! Okay, last time we ended up with the Dark Elves, and we are going to continue on from there. Next is the Cenarians, or as the old language, or the Pidler language would call them, Centaurs. They have a magical affinity for transformation. Transformation magic is something that temporarily reshapes an object, such as turning a couch to a bridge, right? So they reshape the object. They don't fundamentally change what that object is. It's tangible, it's real, but it does have some limitations as far as mass is concerning. The Cenarians are gifted archers, and they actually use this magic to do what is called arrow lining, which is one of their principal weapons of choice. Basically, where they magically change the composition of the arrow mid-flight, right? So instead of just an arrow hitting someone, it's something with much greater mass. Just imagine a steel rod versus a wooden shaft arrow. Anyways, they are specifically not centaurs, and they will tell you that very quickly. That is the Pidler name for them. They are Cenarians. That is the old language. Of course, they have the lower body of a horse, the upper body of a powerful human. They tower over nearly every other race. They can be any color and coat that you see of horses, palomino, dappled, and many more, claim to be older than humans born from the Mother Earth itself. Currently, they work as servers, porters, dock hands, and laborers in earthworks while still staging intense political protests about equal rights and bringing awareness to the blight. They're more rare. They're still common, but more rare than, let's say, satyrs in earthworks. And they typically like large open fields where they can run, they can gallop, and they can stretch their legs, so to speak. Anyway, but they are pretty politically active for the ones that are in earthworks. All right, next we have the gnomes, the fair folk. Now they have a magic affinity called alteration, which is fundamentally important. So even though these creatures are small, they're only typically between 4.5 to 5.5 inches, they have a powerful ability. Now, what alteration magic does is kind of similar to transformation, kind of similar to Magic de Danon, in the sense that they change an object, right? But what the gnomes do and what alteration does is actually fundamentally changes that object on a molecular or cellular level. So instead of a couch becoming a bridge temporarily, it is actually changed to that. Now, obviously, the more an object wants to remain what it is, the more resistance to it, the more difficult it is. So alteration a lot of times targets things that are much easy to be manipulated, which Mother Nature allows them to manipulate, such as air currents, right? Air currents are much more easy to change and manipulate. So a lot of their offensive spells turn air currents into fire currents, right? Liquids and gases are easier to alter. Solid objects take much more persuasion and concentration. The more powerful someone is at alteration, the more they can change things fundamentally. The gnome kingdom of Tiranogue operates with full sovereignty. They have a lord and a king, both that rule jointly. The king rules over the welfare of his people. The lord governs all forms of warfare and political relations. And we see a lot of this dynamic in the first book of the Nickel-Brickleby series. They mostly stay isolated from the magical world, living in cities deep within the earth, away from prying piddlers. Piddlers are the humans that walk around with silly faces, expressions on our faces, basically us. They can't live on the surface any longer, as the magic of earth is not strong enough. So they also have a powerful spell called a Chilean spell. Now this endues something with a magical source of power, right? So most forms of magic actually draw power from the earth itself. Some restore that after the spell's done. Some don't. Some that take that power and it just diminishes into nothing. The Chilean is one of the few spells with alteration that actually can generate its own source of magical power. So for this reason, they become a center part of the first novel, and thereafter many elements that they bring to the magical races of Earthworks that are very important. All right, next we have the fairies. They are also part of the fair folk. They're magic day. They have a magic affinity for magic day Danan, and here's Queen of the Fairies, Titania, right? She's actually in a kind of a human-esque form where she can, typically her natural form is about 6 inches tall, but she can change the shape of how she presents herself. And that is a feat that can be done by high fairies, not just all fairies, but she can actually change it and take on a human form. She practices Magic Danan. Now, Magic Danan is in the sense similar where you can change the appearance of something, but this is doing it on a mental level. The appearance isn't actually changing. The construct of whatever object isn't changing. It's actually the perception of the person who is getting the spell cast upon them, right? And this would, for example, you could put someone in a different situation than where they are currently. You can defend yourself from this kind of magic by resistance or mind shielding. And to the weak-minded, this magic Danan is quite potent. Now, as far as fairies go, there are thousands of subtypes. Each fairy has their own traits, abilities, and reasons for biting people they dislike. They can transform from physical form into light, the defining collective trait, giving them instantaneous travel. So fairies are the only ones that can travel like this. They can turn themselves into light, travel instantaneously across the world, and when they do change from a physical form to light, it actually affects their ability to reason more perfectly, more soundly, right? The more you turn into light, the less you really care about the world around you, and you become kind of how we think of fairies, just naive, and sometimes pull pranks and they don't really know they're hurting anyone, where they're pretty naive, right? And that's kind of the default state of a fairy. They don't really know very much about consequences. They're very happy all the time, and they're very in a less aware state of mind, right? When they stop using that tool and trait, they start developing more human emotions, more ability to reason with themselves. And during the story, we get Evely, who in the beginning is a fairy that is very much more naive, but as the story progresses, she uses that transformation spell, or she turns less into light less often, and she starts gaining more human-like attributes as the story progresses. All right, political tool. Titanic conducts deliberate blackouts, plunging entire districts dark as a statement. So because fairies like to turn into light, there is a form of fairy called the Azray fairies that actually provide a lot of the light in earthworks, right? And initially they did it almost for free, and it lit up the entire world of earthworks pretty easily. But because magic is diminishing because of political strain, Titania has been using that as a political form and blacking out parts of earthworks, right? And that adds to the political dynamics and the resource shortage of earthworks in itself. All right, the blight. Fairies on Earth surface too long begin to disappear. So fairies really can't go on the earth unless they are more in a human state. And otherwise they start disappearing, or they just start fading. They start becoming emotions, which is the origin of fairies. High fairies are born from powerful human emotions during significant events. Evely, daughter of Hope, born from the war with the Brood. She is a child of Hope, and she's actually born from the Brood War that existed and occurred over 200 years ago with the original war against the Demon Lord. All right. And there's lots of different shapes of fairies, and there's lots of different types. All right, next we have the satyrs. They're about 5 feet tall. They have the lower body of a goat and the upper body of a muscular man or woman, standing approximately as tall as a dwarf, maybe about 5 feet. They use a unique kind of magic called musification. Essentially, they produce a magical note on a magical instrument, and that creates some sort of effect. Usually it is curating the existing nature around it, right? So it's using, for example, maybe vines or dirt or some sort of biological elements within or substance within the ground to create vines that shoot up and grab someone, or a branch that reaches down and holds someone fast. But basically manipulating the elements of nature, right, through musification. So they're found in most corners of the known world, filling the functional middle layer of every society: dock officials, mail carriers, ship crew, harbor workers, minor officials. We really see them a lot in the fourth book of the Nickel Brickleby series, where they act as mail carriers. All right, and they're part of the growing political movement protests along the Cenarians and the Hamadryads. They seek equal rights. Also, they want to bring awareness to the blight, right? And we talked about the blight. What that is basically this scourge that's covering the land that is completely devoid and absent all of life, and basically turns and it's spreading and just basically leaves nothing but death and destruction behind. All right, trolls. So there are two kinds of trolls that actually kind of get grouped into one. There are the trolls from the old world, another world, and there's also cave trolls. These actually descended from the earth, and um, they are actually not related to each other genetically. But everything you know about trolls is wrong. The popular image is misreading, so complete it took centuries to correct. They're similar to size and dwarves, not the giants of legend. Gray skin, lean and muscular, clothing made from leaves and woven grass, communicate through hexes, right? And so these are the trolls from another dimension, another world that appeared onto Earth, right? So they communicate a lot of times through a sophisticated sign language, and they use magic called hexation. Hexation magic is important to the trolls because when they left their last world, they took an oath that they would never use a form of magic that actually took more energy than it was returning to Mother Earth, right? So they want to be in line with Mother Earth. So they use hexation. Basically, hexation is still doing the physical cost of something, but capturing that energy that was input in it. For example, if I wanted to clean or if I wanted to make my bed, I would make my bed, casting a hexation spell while I'm doing that, and then I would make it again and make it again. Each time I am capturing that energy input into that spell. So a lot of times hexation is used by servants to do that. And let's say an elf, because elves are typically the ones that have all the servants, they can activate that hexation spell with a word. And all of a sudden the bed's messy. They say the hexation spell. They activate that energy that was already inputted previously, and the bed gets made, right? So you have instantaneous bed being made. All right. Trolls also have part of the curse that they arrived with from the other planet is a unsatiable or insatiable desire to consume gold, right? And so there's some conflation that occurred there because trolls need gold to survive. It needs to be part of their diet. There was this concept and idea early on that trolls were just seeking gold for their own ideas and the own advancement, but there's actually a dietary restriction. Later on, we learn about when dwarves get really greedy and they go after gold. It's called going troll. And the idea is that they turn troll, but we find out later that this is erroneous in the third book. That dwarves really don't turn troll, but it is a perception that we learn about. All right, and then this is also like a rock troll. It is much slower of mind and body, or very strong in body, slower in mind. And there's a few other troll variants that are very similar to this that we see from time to time. They're used a lot for manual labor, lifting things, getting things done, but you have to direct them as they aren't going to independently think things through and contribute to what's going on. Very different from the trolls from the other world, the past world. All right, then you get the goblins. These individuals are 4 feet tall. They actually specialize in lots of different magic, and like that implies, they specialize in a lot of different things. They're usually more of the grimy, dirty parts of the world, but they use hexation, fortuna, and blood magic. Hexation, we already talked about that. Fortuna is basically luck. So a little story about fortuna. It's a rare blessing pronounced on their people since the gods felt so bad how ugly they are. They said, you know what? you're so ugly. Your race is so ugly. We messed up on you so bad. We're going to give you Fortuna magic. And what that does is gives them a little bit more of luck than the average magical creature, right? And this is actually how the goblins choose their leaders, is based off of how much luck that individual has. The goblin king actually is incredibly lucky, and he has an incredibly strong Fortuna signature. And we see that actually in the 6th book of the Nickel Bricklebee. They're small, bald, yellow-eyed, long-nosed, and frequently shirtless. The shirtlessness appears to be cultural rather than practical. Um, the more honest goblins tend to work in infomercials, marketing, or fast food. They can be seen piloting small aircraft from Zephyrs and attaching advertisements to the bottoms of floating ships. So if you think of goblins like telemarketers, you are getting the idea of what a goblin is. Now, that is the more honest one. The less honest ones tend to run gambling halls and underground fighting institutions. Their primary motivator is gold. A hesitating goblin stops hesitating the moment sufficient gold enters the equation. They want to aggrandize themselves. They want to further themselves. And just earning gold is something that is very important to themselves and culture. Next, we have hobgoblins. Now, these are absolutely adorable creatures. They do have some affinity with goblins, but they also use alteration magic, right? Which is similar to the gnomes, which is different from goblins, right? They have a body that's round, compact, covered in fur, resembles a furry soccer ball, large nose, larger ears, and small dark eyes. In combat, do not be underestimated, excellent at alteration magic, which arguably is one of the most powerful forms, because you are actually fundamentally changing what that object is. Uh, Much more difficult to use, and it takes a lot of practice and development. Very few can actually master alteration of the other magical races that don't already have an affinity to it, such as gnomes, such as hobgoblins. They prefer underground caves like their distant cousins, goblins. They like to participate in spider riding games and have had very successful riders in the past. This is a yearly competition shared between the goblins, ratlings, and the hobgoblins. And we get to see a lot more of the spider races in the 6th book of Nickel Bricklebee. All right, next we have the orcs. These are massive individuals. 6'3" is the average height, right? Their skin is various shades of green, 2 tusks visible when they clench their jaw, bodies covered in scars. Each one is a documented history of a fight they won. No orc is ashamed of a scar. It would be like being ashamed of a medal. They have an affinity for blood and dark magic. Dark magic uses various elements, and it gets a lot more complex. We can get into that a little bit later, but blood magic is basically this bringing out of blood and using that as a magical residue to enhance or empower something to greater strength or power. The orcs have a unique armor set. Every single one is unique. No armor set is the same. They're all crafted for the individual and for how they fight, how they move, how they talk. The greater the armor set an orc has, the more respect and esteem that they're going to have in their clan. It is very much a warrior caste society where if you want status in that society, you have to be a great warrior. No other way around it. They are warriors without peer, and they actually come from their old world, which is like the trolls that I mentioned before. But in this old world, they had 1,000 years of war. And essentially, at that time, no one knew how old orcs became because none of them ever died of old age. That's how fierce and intense the war was that went over 1,000 years. And we'll talk about this a little bit later, but one of the great leaders, Unruga, united, surviving the hordes, and who is responsible for getting them off the old world and into our world on Earth. Anyway, that's where I'll leave it for today. I hope you enjoyed this small segment. We are going to finish up in the 3rd part a little bit later from now. Anyway, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you later.